The road stretched endlessly before me, a bleak ribbon of mud and dust that led nowhere and everywhere. My once proud armor, now tainted and battered, weighed heavily on my shoulders, a constant reminder of the man I used to be. Each step was a battle against the weariness that had settled into my bones, the gnawing hunger in my belly, a relentless companion. I had nothing left to lose. No honor, no comrades, no home. The world had moved on, leaving me behind, a relic of battles long past. As dusk fell, I found myself in a nameless town, a place forgotten by the world. The wind whipped through the narrow streets, carrying with it the scent of decay and desperation. The buildings leaned warily against one another, timbers groaning under the weight of time. It was a place where hope came to die. I had resigned myself to finding some corner to curl up in for the night when a flickering sign caught my eye. It hung above the door of a weathered building, swaying in the wind. The sign read, "The Devil's Gambit." The name was enough to stir something within me, a spark of curiosity, or perhaps desperation. I had heard tales of gambling halls like this one, places where fortunes were won and lost, where the desperate and damned gathered to tempt fate. With nothing left to lose, I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, a haze of pipe smoke curling through the dimly lit room. The sound of clinking coins and murmured bets filled the air, punctuated by the occasional cheer or groan of despair. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom, and as they did, the room came into focus. The bartender was the first to catch my attention. He was a grizzled man, his face a map of scars and creases, with a nose that looked to have been broken more times than I cared to count. His hair, a greasy mop of gray, hung limply over his eyes, which gleamed with a cunning that belied his rough appearance. He moved with the ease of someone who had seen it all, his hands deftly pouring drinks and counting coins with the precision of a man who'd spent his life in places like this. At the far end of the bar, a woman leaned against the counter, her dress a garish red that clung to her curves in a way that left little to the imagination. Her lips, painted a deep crimson, curled into a practiced smile as she caught my eye, a smile that promised pleasure but hid a weariness that spoke of a life lived in shadows. Her eyes, dark and knowing, followed me as I moved through the room, a predator assessing its prey. Around the room, various games of chance were underway. At one table, a group of men played dice, their faces drawn with concentration as they placed their bets. The dealer, a wiry man with quick hands and a sly grin, rolled the dice with a flick of his wrist, his eyes flicking between the players and the coins as they wagered. At another table, a game of cards was in progress. The dealer, a burly man with a face like a bulldog, his eyes cold and calculating as he dealt the cards with the precision of a surgeon. And then there was him, seated alone at a table near the back of the room. A man watched the proceedings with an air of detached amusement. He was dressed in fine clothes, dark and tailored, with a cloak that shimmered in the dim light. His face was sharp, angular, with eyes that seemed to gleam like polished obsidian. There was something about him that set him apart from the others, a quiet intensity that drew the eye and held it. He met my gaze, and a chill ran down my spine. His lips curled into a smile, and he gestured for me to join him. Every instinct told me to turn and leave, to walk away and never look back. But that flicker of curiosity or perhaps desperation, flared again, and I found myself crossing the room to his table. "Good evening, Sir Knight," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "You look like a man in search of fortune." "Or perhaps something more," I replied, my voice rough from days of silence. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white. "Fortune, fate, destiny, whatever name you wish to give it. You'll find it here. Please, sit." I hesitated for but a moment before lowering myself into the chair opposite him. The table was bare, save for a simple deck of cards resting in the center. "I am Banalos," he said, his voice like honeyed wine. "And you are?" "Does it matter?" I asked, my tone bitter. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. It seemed to vibrate through the air. "No, I suppose it does not. But tell me, Sir Knight, do you dare to play?" I glanced at the cards, the familiar weight of my pouch pressing against my hip. I had little to wager, but the lure of the game was strong. The promise of a way out, a chance to reclaim some semblance of honor or purpose, was too tempting to resist. "I have little to wager," I admitted. He waved a hand dismissively. "Coin is of little consequence. What matters is the game itself, the thrill of the unknown. Come, let us play a few hands and see where the fortune leads us." I nodded, and he began to shuffle the deck with a deftness that spoke of years of practice. The cards moved between his fingers with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic, their faces a blur as they danced in the dim light. The first hand was dealt, and the stakes were set. Simple at first, a few coins, nothing more. The game was familiar, one I had played countless times in taverns and barracks, and I felt a surge of confidence as I looked at my cards. I played the hand, and to my surprise I won. The coins clinked into my pouch, and I felt a small spark of hope ignite within me. "Well played," Banalos said, his smile never wavering. "But the night is young, Sir Knight. Shall we continue?" I nodded, eager to press my luck. The next hand was dealt, and the stakes were slightly higher. A few more coins, still within my means. The cards were not in my favor this time, and I lost. But the loss was minor, the game still young. The third hand was dealt, and I played with a growing sense of anticipation. The stakes were higher now. My remaining coins wagered on the turn of a card. I won the hand, and the rush of victory was intoxicating. Banalos smiled at me as he gathered the cards, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You are a skilled player, Sir Knight. But skill alone will not carry you through this night. There are other forces at work." I frowned, unsure of what he meant, but I pushed the thought aside. The game was going well, and I was eager to continue. We played on, hand after hand. Some won, some lost. The coins in my pouch dwindled, each loss a small sting, each win a fleeting joy. The hours slipped away, the room growing darker as the night wore on. The faces of the other patrons blurred into the background, my focus entirely on the game before me. Finally, with a final losing hand, my last coin clinked onto the table. The pouch at my side was empty, my fortune spent. I felt a wave of despair wash over me as I pushed back my chair and began to rise. "Leaving so soon?" Banalos' voice was smooth, his tone almost mocking. "You are a skilled player, Sir Knight, but now the real game begins." I paused, my hand on the back of my chair. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. You have played well, but the true stakes have yet to be revealed. I offer you another chance, a way to win back what you have lost." "I have nothing left to wager," I said, my voice hollow. He smiled, that same unsettling smile that had haunted me since I first sat at his table. "You have more to offer than you realize. What if I told you you could wager something far more valuable than coin?" A cold dread settled in my chest, but I forced myself to ask, "What do you mean?" "Not much," he said, his voice soft, almost coaxing. "Just a small piece of your light, a tiny fraction of your soul. In return, I'll grant you a portion of your coins back, enough to continue the game." The offer was absurd, the stuff of fairy tales, but I looked into Banalos' eyes, and I saw something there. Something dark, something that made me doubt my own senses. I should have walked away, but the lure of the game, the promise of redemption was too strong. I felt I had nothing left to lose. So I told myself. "Very well," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll wager this light." Banalos' smile widened, and he nodded. "Excellent. Let us begin." The cards were dealt, and I played my hand with the same care and precision as before. But this time the cards were not in my favor. The final card was laid on the table, and I felt a chill run through me as I realized that I had lost. Banalos' smile never faltered as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Unfortunate," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "but every game has its risks." And then it happened, a sensation unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if something was being scooped out of me, a piece of my very essence torn away. The pain was sharp and fleeting, but the emptiness it left behind was profound. I gasped, my hands clutching at my chest, as I struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Banalos watched me with an amused expression, as if he had seen this 1,000 times before. "Do you feel it, Sir Knight? The loss, the void within you? That is the price of the game." I stared at him, the horror of what I had just done sinking in, but there was no time to dwell on it, no time to mourn for the loss. The game was not over. As I looked around the room, something shifted in my perception. The haze of smoke and the dim light seemed to clear, and I saw the dealers, the bartender, the woman in red with new eyes. They were not what they appeared to be. The bartender's once cunning eyes were now hollow, his face twisted with an expression of eternal despair. The woman in red no longer smiled with that practiced allure. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her eyes sunken and lifeless. The dealers, too, were changed, each one bearing the marks of torment, their souls trapped in a place where time had no meaning. Their bodies were husks, enslaved by the same force that now held a piece of me. I wanted to run, to flee this cursed place and never look back, but I knew it was too late. I'd already given a part of myself to Banalos, and now the only way to reclaim it was to play on. With trembling hands, I reached for the deck and nodded to Banalos. "Deal the cards." The game continued, each hand a battle, and not just of skill, but of willpower. I won some, lost others, and with each loss I felt another piece of myself slip away. The emptiness within me grew. a gnawing void that threatened to consume what little remained of my soul. But I refused to give up. I had faced death on the battlefield, stared into the abyss and survived. I would not let this man defeat me. Man or whatever he was. Not without a fight. Hand after hand I played, the stakes growing higher, the losses more devastating. Banalos watched me with that same predatory smile, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He was in no hurry. He knew that time was on his side, that every loss brought me closer to the point of no return. And then, just as I felt the last shreds of hope slipping away, I saw it. A flaw in Banalos' play. A weakness that he had overlooked. It was a slim chance, a narrow path to victory, but it was there. I placed my wager, this time with a confidence that I hadn't felt in many hands. Banalos watched me with a curious expression, his smile faltering slightly as he studied my face. The game began, and I played with a skill and precision that I had never known. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed with utmost care. I could feel the tide beginning to turn, the balance shifting in my favor. Banalos' expression grew darker as his hands progressed, his eyes narrowing as he realized what was happening. But it was too late. The final card was dealt and the game was mine. I had won. Banalos stared at the cards in disbelief, his face twisted with anger and frustration. The shadows around him writhed and twisted as if reflecting his inner turmoil. "You are a fool," he hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You may have won this hand, but the game is not over. I will not be so easily defeated." I met his gaze, the spark of defiance growing stronger within me. "Then let us continue," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I will play until the end, no matter the cost." Banalos' eyes blazed with a fury, but he said nothing. The deck was shuffled with that same inhuman speed, the cards dealt, and the game began anew. But something had changed. The balance had shifted. The scales tipped in my favor. With each hand I gained back what I had lost. My strength, my courage, my memories, the pieces of my soul that Banalos had taken were slowly returned. And with them came a renewed sense of purpose. The final hand was dealt, and I knew this was it. The moment of truth, the deciding factor. The stakes were higher than ever before, my very soul hanging in the balance. Banalos' eyes bored into mine as I studied the cards, searching for the flaw, the weakness that would bring him down. It was there, hidden beneath layers of deceit and darkness, but I found it. The game was mine. I laid down the final card, the winning hand, and watched as Banalos' face contorted with rage. The shadows around him erupted in a whirlwind of darkness, swirling and twisting as if they would consume the very air around us. But I stood firm, my gaze never wavering as I watched the creature's fury unfold. "You may have won this game, Sir Knight," Banalos spat, his voice a seething hiss. "But you will not escape the consequences. The price of victory is steep, and you will pay it in full." With that, the shadows closed in around him, swallowing him whole. The darkness writhed and twisted, a maelstrom that threatened to consume everything in its path. But I stood my ground. The strength of my soul was restored and my resolve unbroken. The darkness could not touch me now. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm of shadows subsided. The room was still, the air heavy with the lingering sense of dread. Banalos was gone. I glanced around. I was alone. the cards scattered on the table before me, the final hand still fresh in my mind. The game was over, but the weight of the experience lingered, a heavy burden that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. I rose from the table, my body weary but my spirit unbroken. The door to the now empty gambling hall creaked open. My thoughts lingered for a moment on the poor souls trapped inside, wherever they were now. I stepped out into the night. The road stretched out before me, long and uncertain, but I walked it with a sense of purpose. I had faced that creature and won, but the victory had come at a cost. The world outside was dark and cold, the stars hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, but within me a fire burned, a fire of defiance, of determination, of a soul that had been tested and found worthy. I knew that my journey was far from over. The road ahead was fraught with danger, with challenges yet to come, but I would face them with the same resolve, the same strength that had carried me through that game. I was no longer a broken knight, a man without purpose or direction. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And though the price of that victory was high, it was one that I was willing to pay. The wind howled through the streets as I walked into the night, my footsteps steady and sure. The path ahead was uncertain, but I would walk it with my head held high, for I earned the right to do so. As I walked, the memory of that night, of that dark creature's game, would stay with me, a reminder of the strength that lay within, the courage that could be found even in the darkest of places. The world was vast, and there were others like me, others who had fallen prey to his darkness. I would find them, help them, and perhaps in doing so, find some measure of redemption. But the memory of that night, of the game I played, would never completely leave me. It would haunt me, a reminder of the price I paid and the dark creature I had bested. As I walked into the night, I knew the true battle was only beginning.